Hi, everybody, and welcome to Eagle Point Funding's presentation on the new NSF grant deadline, which is rapidly approaching. I want to talk to you about another number of topics. We're going to do a brief overview of federal funding for grants for R&D related topics, and we're going to get into real high resolution of what this NSF opportunity is offering for companies. Which are relevant. A little bit of a spoiler alert. The NSF is investing in a very wide range of technologies. In fact, there's an open topic we're going to talk about a little later on. So if you don't find yourself in the beginning, wait, hold on. Eagle Point will hopefully be able to direct you towards the answers to your questions. Just a little background about us. Eagle Point Funding is a grants and contract specialist for the R&D space. I'm Josh Bar-Owen. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Eagle Point Funding. And we try to alert our community regarding new grant opportunities in order to direct them, to work with them, and to help them on a consulting basis in order to identify grant opportunities and to go after them. There's a lot of tough competition when we look at the federal grants, but it's a very worthy endeavor if you have interesting technology. The tough competition means that you need to know what you're looking for. You need to really hone in on what your R&D looks like, both in the near and in the long-term future. And you also need to make sure that you are always with your finger on the pulse. Why? Because this opportunity is incredible. We're talking about $176.8 billion, of which that money is split up between the public sector and the private sector, as well as the intramural fundings, which every federal agency has in and of itself. So this is the grant budget for all of different federal mechanisms. As you see, a lot of money is going to universities, a lot of money is going to private industry, where it is primarily in the form of what's called broad agency announcements. However, there is a small reserved amount of money, which is not paltry. It's an important amount of money. We've talked about it a little while. It's a couple $1 billion, which is reserved for small business innovation research. That's 3.2% of the federal budget. And there's 0.4%, which is reserved for technology transfers between public institutions and private industry holders. When we look at the quality of the grant itself, it's what's called non-dilutive funding. Dilutive funding, on the other hand, is what most of us know, unless we're in the university space where it's far less common, where you're receiving money from a venture capital or another type of an investor, or you're taking a loan from the bank system, where there's either a transfer of equity or there is money that needs to be paid back with a premium. It comes with advisors and additional board members typically, and often there's also transference of IP. Not is the case when it comes to non-dilutive funding. We're talking about a zero equity transfer, zero outside interference. In fact, you get help as opposed to interference, and all IP rights are maintained. What are the motives of the federal government? Pretty simply, the federal government wants to advance knowledge and technology as a whole. They also want to promote business, because with a strong industry, you'll have a strong U.S. economy. Also, they want to improve quality of life, which is the result of improving technology. On top of that, the federal government is interested on an economic level, because the government sees a $2.30 return on their investment for every federal dollar they invest. How so? Well, they're receiving from, when you create a product, you commercialize, and that's what they're encouraging you to do. They're going to see from that taxes, you're going to create jobs, and altogether the federal government is going to benefit from an economic space as well as from an ideological space. Grants go beyond the actual grant themselves. This is an interesting study also performed by the Milken Institute, where we see that federal grants are an excellent source in order to find private sector investments in the long term. In fact, for every $1 that's invested in you by the federal government, you're able to reap on average $8.38 from the private sector. And this is very clear because federal grants, in order to receive a federal grant, you have passed a number of high-level tests by the best in the business, which means that your technology is approved as the hallmark of quality or the gold standard. When we take a look at small business innovation research and STTR programs, we see that then these numbers are from 2015. The numbers have grown since as the federal budget has grown as well. We see roughly 2.5 billion annually set aside. It's to support R&D and cutting edge technologies, where there's also an interest to help research intensive American small businesses. These numbers are out of date. This is the last time the SBR government website updated their numbers. 160,000 awards granted. I think this was from 2015, and 10 patents today. The goals we discussed is very clear that they want to foster and they want to promote innovative technology in the private sector. And when you look at the testimonials and when you look at the what the federal government's done, whether it's creating the internet or giving rise to companies like Qualcomm or Lyft Labs, the federal government invests in these companies, and these companies find a strong level of support afterwards. All the big agencies support it. Today, we're going to be focusing on National Science Foundation. When I say big agencies, any agency that has a federal budget for R&D of upwards of 100 million, they are required by law to set aside 3.2% for small business innovation research and another 0.4% for STTR. What does it look like? Well, if we look at it, we see it's about in the STTR, it's about 0.4% of the budget. As we mentioned, at this time it was around $250 million, but that has grown as the budget has grown since 2015. Let's take a deeper look at the NSF for a second. If there are an incredible amount of technologies, I mentioned before, the internet being one of them, that have come out as a result of NSF investments in the companies, where they have an annual budget, which is very large, close to $200 million for R&D, which is reserved specifically for small businesses. This has powered 2,500 companies since 2012. And since 2014, there have been 70 exits from companies that received federal grants from the NSF. And they have also, those companies have garnered $3.5 billion in private investments. So exactly what we were talking about before, we see that it's a very interesting way to fund your company, though the competition is extremely stiff. What are the criteria? Well, your technology has to be game-changing. It has to be high risk, which means it's based on unproven technology. There's got to be market pull. You don't want to be involved in something which is game-changing and or maybe high risk, but it has no market pull, because then what's the point of investing? Because why? The federal government wants you to be able to scale. They want you to take that and go to the market, and they want you to create a successful business as a result of the grant you're receiving. And they invest a lot of money in this, up to $1.5 million per grant. Grants in SBIR, as opposed to broad agency announcements, are given over a number of short-term phases. Broad agency announcements, which we mentioned is 97 or 96 to 97% of the federal budget, are given over the long term. Not the case with SBIR. These are split up into three different phases, where the first phase, when it comes to the NSF, which has actually a larger budget than other grant agencies, phase one is up to $225,000, and that grant is supposed to last you a minimum of 6 months. And the deadlines typically throughout the year are on June and December. This year, that deadline has been postponed to July 10th. Phase two is up to $750,000, where this is supposed to take you for 24 months. It's supposed to take you pretty close to market. Depends on what type of technology. I know in the cybersecurity world, usually the R&D timelines are a little bit shorter than this, but for other R&D, it's standard to need a number of years. And that's why they offer Phase 2B, which is a qualifying match of 50% of whatever you receive in third-party investments. So as you see, $1.5 million over the long run. What you need is to get in front of the right POs. You need to make sure that your technology is promoted in the right way. And between phase one and phase two, you need to make sure that you come back at that with the right approach. And that's where we help companies. The same is true for phase 2B. So who qualifies as a small business? First of all, it's any company which is for profit. Nonprofits cannot apply for small business innovation research, but they can apply if you're a university institution. You can apply through STTR, and if you're a university, you can also apply through broad agency announcements. So we need, you're organized as for profit, you have less than 500 employees, and at least 50% of your business is owned by a U.S. citizen. Also, the work must be done within the U.S. When we look at the characteristics of which type of companies the National Science Foundation is investing in, we see that last year, 293 companies received at least the phase 1 grant. The median number of employees was 3. So we're not talking about companies that are closer to that 500 range, although it is possible. We're talking about small companies. So if you are a small company right now, a company with just you and your co-founder, or you and your CFO and CTO, don't be intimidated, because the median number was 3 last year. 64% of these businesses were in operation for 3 years or less. So also young companies, small companies. As I mentioned before, when we look at the technology topic areas, the first thing I want to say here, and right now I'm quoting the NSF by saying America's Seed Fund, which is how they invest in small business innovation research, encourages proposals in all areas of science and engineering. An exact fit into one of these topics or subtopics is not required. Please note that the topics and subtopics listed here are examples and are not exhaustive. And what is the federal government doing there? It's fishing. The government wants to invest in the next generation technology, good technology which could have an impact on the market, which is state of the art, and therefore they never limit themselves towards technology which maybe they didn't think of. And that's, by the way, if we look later on at broad agency announcements, which we won't have time to get to today, we know that that's the case. We know in the broad agency announcements, they're very broad. SBIR is usually more narrow, and that broadness allows the government to be afforded the space to make a decision on an interesting technology, even though it's not necessarily on their specific list. Look at these topic areas. I'm not going to read these. You receive these in an email. So if you're here, it's probably because you fit into one of these general topic areas, where there's a range, and there's even here an other topic space, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But if we look at a finer resolution of what does this actually look like, we know, and I'm just taking a couple of selected areas of interest. We have 3D and 4D printing. We have bio-inspired manufacturing. We have modeling and simulation. We have cyber manufacturing, transportation technologies, human-centric technologies, sustainable manufacturing, all different levels of energy, whether it's harvesting or capture or storage or use. And we also have robotics, human-machine interfaces, wireless-related technologies, IoT sensors. And just a small bit on sensors, the SBIR and federal grant community is investing a lot into different types of sensors, whether it's on medical devices, whether it's on medical and health related devices, or we're talking about sensors that are LiDAR operated for AV, or in the space of other type of autonomous machines. We have AI, machine learning, security, authentication, privacy, cloud computing, big data, virtual and augmented reality, software, social media, photonics, blockchain or DIG technology, security, anonymity, identification, efficiency solutions, and much, much more. As you see, there's a variety of topics ranging from robotics to software related to cybersecurity, VR, blockchain, you name it. And actually, if we take a look at, earlier we mentioned the other topics is making a very clear call for blockchain related technology. So how do you find success in the federal system? One, you need to know the federal system, meaning what's received funding in the past, what has received funding, what they declare they're looking to invest in, and also if you look into the different policy papers which each agency puts out, and if you're in contact with the different federal officers, then that's a really good way to find out what they're interested in. That's exactly what we do in Eagle Point. You also need to clarify your vision and capabilities. A lot of companies have a general idea of what they want to do over the next couple of years, but you really need to hone in on where your R&D could go in order to present a clear vision. You need to identify multiple opportunities and match your roadmap. And now I'm stepping aside from this current NSF opportunity. This is one opportunity we're talking. You're going to have a one-shot opportunity, and the NSF is a really great first area of funding when it comes to SBIR. But long-term grant strategy, and this is what we offer at Eagle Point Funding, as well as the short-term strategy, is based on finding more than one opportunity, not just one, and going after them in a systematic way. And that's what we get to the last, is engaging a long-term multi-submission strategy. Just a little bit about us, so you know who's talking to you today. And I'm sorry to be rushing through this. Eagle Point Funding is the biggest company of its kind, specializing in consulting for non-dilutive funding. We are 20 years old. We're a daughter company of Freemind Group, which was established in 1999. Together, we're 70 plus full-time employees. We have 250 plus active clients. And what makes us successful, I believe, is our short-term as well as the long-term approach. In the case of the short-term, it's like identifying that we have an upcoming deadline and that the NSF has $200 million in their pockets that they're waiting to give to companies like yours. And it's a question of making sure that you're capable of building a grant application which is compelling, which is going to stand out, which is going to focus on your vision and also what you've done so far. And I believe that's what's led to our success when it comes to actual financial awards, over $1.5 billion to date and roughly $70 million annually. So now I want to give an opportunity for questions. We don't have too much time because it's a busy day when it comes to federal funding, and we have a number of clients that we have to talk to a little later on. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, I think we can share just a couple points if we recap federal grants and also the space of SBIR. Federal grants have a number of different mechanisms. They have broad agency announcements. You have small business innovation research. You have technology transfer called STTR, and other types of contracts which are in the R&D space. So what you need to do when you're going after federal grants is first and foremost know how great the scale of opportunity is here. But what the federal government is looking for is for revolutionary technology. They are not interested in any sort of Me Too technology. There are many ways to hide good technology, but if you have bad technology, you have zero chance of receiving a high-level grant. If you have good technology, it's just a question of putting that technology in front of the right sets of eyes and identifying the right opportunities so that you can maximize your chance of success. So if there are no questions, I'll move on. We have an upcoming webinar which talks about all the funding opportunities beyond small business innovation research. And this is on June 13th. We'll be talking about different funding mechanisms. We're talking about a couple of examples and different areas of interest. If what I said in the last 15 minutes appeals to your team because you have revolutionary technology, because you have a talented team, whether it's big or small, then I'd like to make a time to chat. You can either directly contact me through my calendar. This is my Calendly app. I'll leave the screen up for just a few minutes so that you can jot it down or put it directly into your browser. You can also reach me through email at josh@eaglepointfunding.com. I'm happy to hear about any opportunities, upcoming opportunities, or for innovative research, and we're happy to work with a number of different companies on this particular grant. We're going to be capping it off because there's a real small deadline. Even though we're a big team, we want to make sure that we're giving it our all for any customers that we're working with. So we are going to be taking a limited amount of companies for this particular NSF opportunity. But don't worry, if you don't get in, there are more opportunities to come soon. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. I'm seeing on the comments here that there was a pause in the screen, so I'll just quickly show the screen from top to bottom. As we mentioned, federal budget for R&D, SBIR, STTR, non-dilutive versus dilutive, motives to advance knowledge, improve quality of life, and economic, garnering private investments as a result, small business innovation and small business technology transfer. We have the 4 goals of the program. Certain companies that have received federal funding here, whether it's iRobot, Qualcomm, Lift Labs, agencies that participate in the SBIR program, anybody who has funding of more than $100 million for R&D, small business technology transfer, STTR program. We talked about NSF's SBIR profile, $200 million in R&D funding, 2,500 awards to date, 70 exits since 2014, and $3.5 billion in private investments. Game-changing, high-risk, market pull, and scale. Phase 1, up to $225,000. Phase 2, $750,000. And Phase 2B is where the NSF will match, for every dollar that you receive in third-party investments, they'll match it with 50 cents up to $500,000. Who qualifies? For-profit organizations with 500 or fewer employees, needs to be U.S.-based and more than 50% U.S. owned. NSF company characteristics at phase 1, 293 companies were awarded phase 1 last year. Small companies with relatively young companies. Technology topic areas we discussed. Finer resolution we discussed. Human-centric 3D, 4D, robotics, blockchain, big data, cybersecurity. We discussed the 4 key components of Eagle Point's formula. We talked about Eagle Point as a company, short-term and long-term approach, and awards to date. Our upcoming webinar, and of course, my Calendly. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any more questions, then please contact me at my email or via my calendar. As I mentioned before, we'll be taking a small number of companies to work with after going after this SBIR opportunity. Qualifications for a company to work with Eagle Point Funding is that they are fit the qualifications of SBIR, and they have an innovative technology which is in a relevant area, which is also market relevant, and a capable staff. Thank you and have a great day.